Hello there, and again, welcome to another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, or I should say, the second half of our show. What I'd like to do actually is go over some of the points that Mr. Widener, Jay Widener, brought up, and I'd like to really focus more on the whole Noah thing again. And the reason for that, and I'm going to take it more into maybe a religious standpoint, and well, I'm going to mix some religion and maybe some conjecture and science and all that kind of stuff together. Again, I guess there's really no real barrier between all these things, though. I mean, I think society today creates artificial barriers between spirituality, history, religion, science, and all these things. So, what I'd like to do here is make a quote from the Bible, and it's Luke 17:26. And it states, "Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be in the days of the Son of Man," in reference to Jesus returning to earth. Now, what I would like to ask is this: what are the prerequisites for that? I mean, if we look at the Bible, we merely get we'll get a really brief description. If you consider this was a destruction of humanity, millions and millions of people wiped out. Now, I say millions because ultimately I've watched some documentaries on the Old Testament, and it was, well, lots of scholars that have studied that have said that the population of the earth at that time, at least in conjecture again, would probably be around 35 or more million people. So I think sometimes people get hooked up on those genealogies. And like I pointed out with the interview with Mr. Widener, the thing is that let's pretend like we're talking about kings and queens of England. Do we mention every one of them if we have just an abbreviated history course? If I'm supposed to teach a group of, let's say, high schoolers about the royalty in England, I'm not going to mention all the ones that really didn't amount to very much or were in power when things were really stable. I might throw in Henry VIII. I might throw in, let's say, Queen Victoria, Elizabeth, those kind, but the ones in between are going to be left out. Now, if we're talking about a very abbreviated text, and I think that the book of Genesis is extremely abbreviated. Come on, the whole thing about the 6 days and 6 nights of creating the world. We know that it was longer. We know that the actual translation of days is actually eons. So again, you got one or two verses talking about what might have been 100 million years. So a lot of stuff is left out. So it could be, and this is speculation, it could be that when we look at these genealogies in the Old Testament where it goes to Adam and then he begets these guys and they beget these guys, for all we know, these were separated by periods. It'd be like if we said something about, and Henry VIII beget Queen Victoria. Well, he didn't really, but it would mean the line. And maybe you only used the people that were the most important in these genealogies, which could have meant that maybe it wasn't a literal this person beget this person, but it might be that that was in their family line that they came about, which of course would explain the whole thing about the world's 6,000 years old. Well, that's kind of difficult if we know that there's civilizations that have had their presence on the earth for 6,000 or more years. That would be very difficult then, unless we go by the concept that maybe God reused a planet. These people were erased, and then God decided to use this planet again, for Adam and Eve. I don't think that's really going to be something that's going to hold up. So I think that the genealogy thing about the begats and begats is probably dealing with family lines rather than literal, this person is this person's father, or so forth. We don't get a mention of mothers, unfortunately, except for Eve, and then for some reason we forget all about women until we get to what, Moses, or at least Egypt. So anyway, I should correct that. We do get women mentioned with Abraham, but again, the period between Noah and Abraham, probably a very, very long time. Now, if we take a look at this about Jesus is supposed to come back when things are like they were in the days of Noah, well, you can read into that there was violence in the days of Noah, so God came back, or like the book of Jasher goes into more detail, that there was unbelief. If you go by the Muslim ideas, the people were idol worshippers. So no matter what, we're talking about a behavior that's associated with the destruction of humanity. The problem is that people have been pretty nasty to each other and doing wicked things throughout history. Okay? Where there's been countless situations. I mean, the Romans did quite a bit of attacking and destroying massive numbers of people, hundreds of thousands. In Israel, millions, when they finally destroyed Israel. You had many wars that have resulted in millions upon millions upon millions of deaths. You've had some really crazy communist dictators that have killed millions and millions of people. But yet, Jesus didn't come back. Now, of course, to the skeptic, that means he's not coming back. He's a figment of someone's imagination. But if we take a look at some of the weird stuff that we have going on in, Genesis, but also the book of Enoch, there's a few other books, the book of Jasher. Now, I should note, Jasher is quoted in the Bible. There's references made to the book of Jasher. So it must have been authoritative text. This must have been something that people assumed, prophets assumed, was scripture. It was left out for some reason, as was the book of Enoch. Except, the book of Enoch is actually used by the Coptics, who did not get the Catholic influence. So in Ethiopia, there's 10, 15 million people who do read the book of Enoch when they read the Bible. So anyway, now, if we look at Jasher, though, we get some weird stuff about, one, the Nephilim. And I'm going to propose a different explanation for the Nephilim here in just a moment. The alien explanation is that aliens came down, had sex with humans, and made babies. And these were the Nephilim. There are some biblical literalists who believe that angels came down, had sex with human women. This created a mixed race, divine / human. That's kind of problematic if we consider if Jesus' father, that Jesus' DNA from his father was the same thing, divine, then does that make Jesus a Nephilim? I mean, if you go by that definition. And then there's another explanation, which I'll go into in just a moment. But if we take a look at the book of Jasher, it says the sons of men were taught how to mix one species with another species, and that provoked God, and that is what finally led to the destruction. Now, the other thing was that the Nephilim, these guys were hot, and human women just wanted them and to have babies with them and that sort of thing. There was something special about them. They didn't, I watched the Noah movie a while back. I just don't get the idea that too many women would want to be mixing with the Nephilim as they were presented in that movie. I mean, they look like the rock creatures that were in the mountains on the Hobbit. They look like some sort of rock slash transformer or something like that. Not something you really want to cuddle up next to, okay? But for some reason, in the Bible, we also have the part about human women seem to want to be with these guys and to have babies with them. We don't have a mention if some of these were females that may be mixed and then they bore children. But there's something interesting. A lot of people on the internet, when the Nephilim come up, they talk about evil. They talk about giants. I have some problems if you take the word giant literally. Again, kind of problematic if you have someone that's 15, 20 feet tall having relations with someone, I don't know, who's 5.5 feet tall. If humans would be the same size now as they were then. I think most people can realize it would be really difficult not only to conceive a child, but also the childbearing process would probably be pretty dangerous. It'd be like mixing an elephant with a chihuahua. So what are we talking about when we're talking about giants? Maybe we're talking about, like the Bible does say, these were men of renown. So obviously you had a mixture. There were some that were evil, some that were good. Some, renown is usually not associated with really nasty characters. So what if these angels were, and again, speculation. I know there's text and stuff that we could refer to that would actually support this, but what if these people were actually, people that were either from an older civilization, if we assume that Adam came long before this period, that this could have been a civilization that was technological, that was very advanced. They had to be. Well, they had to be because it actually, in the book of Jasher, it says these people taught humans not just how to mix human and animal DNA and animal and animal and animal and plant DNA together. They also taught them metallurgy. Now, that's quite interesting if we consider that if we go by the standard historical narrative, metallurgy was not something brought in until relatively recently. And here you have the idea that before the flood, metallurgy was taught. Now, that was one thing that I think the Noah movie with Russell Crowe did get right. It didn't get it right enough. I didn't think that the people presented there really would have had the technology to do much with biotech. They looked like they were maybe at like a World War I era. And they didn't even have planes or anything. They had metal. They had welding and things like that. But I think they'd had to be a little bit more advanced than World War I era to be doing advanced biotechnology. And if we take a look, then, that they were these special people who were breeding into the human species, were teaching metallurgy, were teaching biotechnology, were practicing all of these things, I think the technology would have had to be very advanced. We are only now, as far as we know, we are only now getting to the point that we can do the things that were described here. Now, it didn't say anything about humans were having sex with animals and they were making chimera or hybrids, like centaurs or pans or I can't remember the one that's the lion slash dragon. But anyway, the thing is, Griffin. That's right, Griffin. The thing is that you would think that a very primitive, that's the way people look upon people that lived in the past, a primitive society in ancient Israel, writing some sort of what you could say is a creation myth, that they would write something in the respect that they used some sort of divine magic or something, and they were able to turn into animals and have sex, or create animals with some sort of magical method. No, there was something said that they taught men how to mix the animals together. Nothing really magical about it. No abracadabra. They were teaching them. So, Now we have violence. Well, we have violence today. I could think of 3 different areas around the world, and I don't see Jesus coming back right now, but 3 different areas of the world that we could wind up with World War III. That, of course, is, well, Israel and Palestine are always, on the forefront of that one. Then you got the whole ISIS thing, and then you have the Ukraine. Okay, 100-year anniversary of World War I. Maybe we're getting ready for World War III. I don't know. But the thing is, we have a lot of violence today in the world. And the days of Noah, they had a lot of violence. But we don't see an immediate return of Jesus yet. So, can we just assume that the technology part is not here yet? We are only now starting to experiment with chimeras. There are labs around the world, and you can look this up for yourself. If you think that this is something from some conspiracy site or something like that, it's not. You look up animal-human DNA mixing. There are cows that have been given DNA from humans that produce human milk. Okay? They produce human milk. There are experiments underway to create pigs that you could take their organs and use in humans, since for some strange reason pigs are very close to humans when it comes to DNA. Makes you wonder what was going on back in Noah's day in that regards, huh? Because I remember there was a really prominent geneticist who actually said that the only explanation for this was at some point a chimpanzee must have had sex with a pig for this to occur. And for some strange reason, a lot of the major religions say that you're not supposed to eat pigs. Maybe something weird about that people have not considered. So anyway, but let's get back to this main point. Look up goats and spiders. Yeah, in Utah, they have goats that they've replaced the genes for their mammary production with spider, so that they produce milk that when you dry it, it's spider silk that they can use for bulletproof vest and for suturing. Biodegradable, works really well. And there's also experiments done on creating embryos. They're not supposed to take them to term, but embryos that are part rabbit and part human. Now, these are things that are reported. You look it up yourself if you don't believe me. These things are being done in labs today. Okay? We've come a long ways since when Stalin had approved experiments with mixing human and gorilla and chimpanzee and seeing if that would work. Okay? Very primitive in that point. Stalin finally shut it down just as there had been some Russian women volunteering to get impregnated. Before they were down, I think, someplace in Africa, and they were using they were paying some African women to have the gorilla sperm placed in them to see if it would create babies, and then use that as a way of saying, see, evolution worked. The humans and apes are actually part of the same species. Didn't work. And for some strange reason, Stalin decided to get rid of the experiment and exile the biologist that was working on these things. But we've come a long way since then. We can do lots of stuff. And look at your food you're eating today. Your tomato might be part octopus. Look it up. There's a lot of the food that you're eating. If you're in the United States, I mean, not necessarily in Europe and Russia and some other countries, but if you're in the United States, you're eating food that is not what God put on the shelf, okay? It's mixed. And it's just going to continue going. We're going to continue seeing more and more of the genetic mixing. And, in nature, you don't see a carrot have relations with a chicken. Okay? It just does not happen. But in the lab, yes, it does. You can take genes from a carrot and put them into a chicken or vice versa and create a species that might be a chicken that has a certain protein in it or a carrot that has a certain protein. So we're going at it full force right now. And I think we see these stories that soon women and women will be able to have kids together. 2 women won't have to rely on sperm donation from a man. 2 men will be able to have a child together. The parents already we've had situations where there's been babies born where they have some of the DNA from a different person than their parents, so therefore they technically have three parents. But this is a rapidly changing technology, rapidly advancing, and it's going to get more and more and more advanced. So how do we know, for instance, that the so-called angels of God, that the Nephilim came from, the mixtures, were not actually humans that were created in the lab and made to where they were perfect? How do we know that some of the DNA, how do we know that everyone didn't take advantage of some of this stuff? The lifespans of people during this period. Why is it, if God was the one that gave them these really long lifespans, did God tell Noah, it's in the Bible, humans are supposed to live 125 years? Noah at the time, I think, was 600 when he got that information. He lived 300 years after the flood. Methuselah lived longer than that. So the thing is, was this from God, or was it something that was developed? And again, 20 years ago, people would have laughed at you if you talked about human beings living these really long lifespans. Even in our science fiction today, people live normal lifespans. It's one problem I had with the Noah movie too. They had Noah being some hippie type guy, and it looked like the lifespans of people were about what they are today. I was anxious to see how they would present lifespan. Well, they kind of made it look like people live the same lifespans as today. So, Anthony Hopkins playing Methuselah, it would have been more fun if he would have looked the same age as Noah, even though he was hundreds of years older, and they played around with that, but they didn't. But the thing is, the thing we find in the book of Jasher was that there was a lot, at least what it says was there was a lot of crop failures and destitution, things like that taking place during this period. How are you sure the seeds you would buy at the store, if you want to grow your own garden, unless they're heirloom seeds, are going to actually produce? Nowadays, a lot of seeds are made with what they call terminator genes, I think, where the plant will grow one cycle, but then its seeds will not grow afterwards. And this is so that whatever company developed them will be able to continue selling these seeds. So what if this is what they were doing in those days and it just went wrong? And you wound up with massive crop failures and hunger and that sort of thing. But if these if these Nephilim were actually humans that may have been genetically advanced humans, and then they were mixing with humans, and that would be popular. You think about what would happen if you had some athlete, you bred some athletes today that had, and a woman knew that if they had children with these athletes, they would be absolutely perfect children, and they would be strong and healthy and free of disease and intelligent and so forth. Maybe that's what was going on then. Okay? Maybe that's why women just seem to be going, whoa, because that's the way it sounds in all these books, Enoch, Jasher, and so forth. So anyway, one last thing. You're probably thinking, well, okay, lost there for just 1 second. The thing is, in closing, just think what it would look like if our society ended and our history had to be abbreviated, and you had to describe things after, let's say, our technology advances well beyond what it is today, but that the people that were the scribes generation after generation after generation had to edit and edit and edit and edit. You might get some of our advanced things today, maybe the space shuttle, someone trying to describe the space shuttle. It would start taking on a angelic form. It would start being described that way. I think maybe this is what happened in this era. You probably had a very scientific era, a very advanced era. Noah was not some simple farmer. He probably was from the upper class and had a really good education, goes out, buys up some land, starts to build the boat. I think that's much more plausible than a lot of times, in the movie, God grew a forest for him really fast. And a lot of other movies about Noah, he just goes out and starts chopping trees down. Don't think it happened that way. At least that's it. It would make more sense if it was the way that I've been talking about, the idea that you could wind up with a advanced civilization, then someone's warned about an impending crisis based on their misuse of technology. Well, anyway, that's some food for thought there. And I hope you enjoy it. Think about it. Do some research about it. You might find some interesting things out there. Anyway, this is Michael Cross signing off for Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.